Hello, my name is Dr. Scott Young, and today we're going to do the second of our series on free will versus predestination. Coming right up. And so in that free will versus predestination, we need to back up just a hair. I want to give you that understanding. You really got to watch that first video, because in that first video, we talked about determination or predestination by Calvin. And Calvin wanted to say things like predestination entails God's sovereignty in every area of our life. And he was right. But where he started to move a little off the ball is to say that to make faith the cause of election is altogether absurd, utterly variant of the words of the Apostle Paul. That's where we start to see the struggle inside of what he says. Then we had Arminius, who comes many years later, but still in the same lifetime by the end of his lifetime. And Arminius says in Freewill, it sought to give the believer the ability to act upon one's own discretion without the necessity of fate. And so he's saying, well, wait a second. We can't have fate going in here. That person has to have free will. Both of them were responses out of the Catholic Church to answer the questions that were happening to the people. They had no free will. They had no control of it. They felt like another person had control. And therein lies the exact words that we need to move forward on, because the world is asking these questions, and we as believers in Christ, inside of the truth of God, need to be able to answer those questions. Let's do that together. So as we move forward on this topic, flip a couple pages here. As we move forward on this topic, we want to show you the words of choice and control. They're much more efficient words to answer the conversation within the New Testament than free will versus predestination. See, non-religious humans tend to gravitate toward free will. Why would they do that? It's because we want to have control. So if I have the free will to do as I wish, that's a good thing. I don't want destiny pushed upon me. I don't want someone else hijacking their ideas or their control over my choices. We're worried that someone else's free will also impinge upon our own. Someone might want to walk up to you with a gun and say, give me all of your money. His free will is impinging upon your free will. And therefore we have this point of love that we miss in there. We're always worried about our destiny. Now, when we do that, atheists love to talk about free will, but they don't like to talk about destiny, but every once in a while they trip themselves up. Frank Turek has this book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. He's so snarky. I love what he says in there. And there are several other books that he talks about the same thing, that they use words, they steal words from God to answer their own logic in there. And yet destiny implies that something's ahead of the person, not just random chances out there. So let's look at those two words of choice and control. Now you might like my definitions here, you might not like them, that's okay. This is just one way of explaining it. Control what one perceives to direct the behaviors inside of work and play. That's an internal thing, or it can be an external way of handling it. Whereas choice is one's ability to decide to create one's fate. So that these are actually working together. Think of the teeter-totter. If control is high, choice is low. If choice is high, control is low. And it's a balance inside of that. Now, I'm not going to make political points in here, but you're going to see how this is infecting all parts of our life. Let's move forward and talk about those. When we have high control government or low governmental control, we'll see two different types of ways of thinking about it. One is fascism and communism. Now, you need to go backward and think about this. There are new conversations that people want to talk about social democrats, or, there's some crazier words, but we need to go to the basis of that. You see, fascism comes out of Nazi Germany. And there are other types of fascism, of that super control, but it happens from World War I. When the Versailles Treaty is signed in France, it paralyzes the people of Germany. They have no money. Inflation is pushing through the roof. People are so fearful. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to feed their people. Hitler comes in with a type of control to change things. He radically adjusted things. You see, actually even FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, actually brought in a type of socialism almost the same time frame. And he did it with more of a democracy, but there was less control that happened for the people. Now, in fascism, did you know that in America, we were more in favor of it because we were scared of the communism that came about? Communism happened back in World War I. During World War I, Russia had the Tsar, the very last Tsar, Nicholas. Nicholas had no caring for the people. He pushed them down. There was the top aristocrats and then everyone else as serfs. And it was the last kingdom, imperial type of behavior upon the planet, or at least one of those last ones. And what happened is that, did you know that Germany sent $25 million on Reichmarks over to Russia with Lenin to take over the country, but the country was already in massive turmoil, and by that time, the Tsar had abdicated the throne. And so many people for literally 6-7 years were fighting back and forth, the Tsarists versus the Red Army. And they fought back and forth until the Reds finally won. And then what happened is that control came about because a few had to figure out the rest of it for the people. They had low choice. And through the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, all the way through the late 80s, communism reigned in many countries. And it was a super amount of control, but it comes from a fearful level of people. So when there is low choice by the people, what tends to occur is bloody revolt. People will push away from those, and we see it in all levels of life, all levels of government that are heavy controls. Now, when we have a low control government, what that tends to be is the republic versus the democracies. There's a high will of the people. France, for instance, is a type of democracy, more socialism now, but it started as more as a democracy, whereas America is a republic. Now, you can go look that up yourself, and don't believe me, but just go look it up for your own issues. But what that comes from is a high will of the people. In America during the 1700s, late 1700s, we were pulling away from the kingdom of England. And we saw this massive control, and a revolt or a revolution started to happen. And so the people wanted to create their own will or their own choice. Now, it's difficult for governments to deal with that because sometimes they don't know how to control us. And so I'll give you an example of a type of control that sometimes changes based upon the will of the people. Let's say the speed limit of 55. I grew up with that. I actually grew up with other speed limits, but when 55 came around, when I started driving a lot, it was mostly effective. Now, through the Colorado area, it was fine. But if you drive up into Nebraska or Wyoming, you just can't drive 55. When I was in my residency from Roswell to Clovis, New Mexico, it's this stretch of road that nothing's in between it. And no one drove 55. We all drove 85 to 90. I got pulled over one time going that, and I was really nice with the cop, and he pulled me down to 69 in a 55 zone. Thankful for that circumstance, because I was just trying to be nice to him. I said, yeah, you're right, I did it. Now, over the years, they started to loosen that up. Some states have 70, 75, 80, 85 different ways that they would set it. And that is the change of the will of the people. Now, sometimes there are levels of chaos when two portions of people very heartily disagree upon a topic. During the Revolution, the signers of the Constitution knew that slavery was going to be an issue, that they were talking about slavery, that all people, all men were created equal, and yet we had an unequal group. The South was needed to be a part of the democracy, so they tabled the idea, they punted. And that punting went on for around 70 years until it blew up in the Civil War, 61 through 1865. And do you know that 1% of Americans died in the Civil War? If we took that forward to today, when we have 360 million people, that'd be 3.6 million people that would die. It's bigger than any war in the percentage that the Americans had ever suffered. And that's what happens when we fight about those big issues. Now, let's just move forward, because this isn't about trying to be in government issues. Let's just talk about employer issues. I'm an employer. I have 6 employees underneath me. And at this moment, we're in the summer of 2019. I have 2 new employees. High employer controls versus low employer controls. High employer controls tends to be a micromanager. Now, when you have new employees in a complicated job, if you have a less complicated job like food handling or some such, within a week or two, that person can really be up and running and doing the job without any oversight. But in the more complicated jobs, like in audiology, there's much greater oversight that has to happen. Now, actually, I have a favorite friend of ours who just passed away several months ago, Pam Price Hoskins. She had an amazing viewpoint of it. She used to say that in the first year, you barely know what your job is. After about 3 years, you finally get it. You know how to teach it. You know how to operate in all levels of the job. And I really agreed with that. In the beginning, there are high level of micromanaging. You're overlooking all of the employees' behaviors. But it creates an anxiety for those employees as we have too much control. Because we have these experienced employees that don't know how to deal with this over-controlling behavior. It leads to poor company performance because that manager is always trying to over-regulate anything that might happen. It goes into low employee morale. Then employees just say, you know what, I'm done. I quit. I don't want to deal with this anymore. Versus a low employer control management style, which is a poor management style. That's when employees have little regulation. So the employer puts out some level of regulation but doesn't oversee it very well. Now, just give you an example with 2 food services in the Tulsa area. And they're in every town of the nation. So for instance, let's just say, we'll say Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A has a gorgeous level of employer control. These kids, the same kids that work at any of these other places, have a level of control to know and how to interact with the public. Whereas this one ice cream place, I don't want to get into the name of that, it has really poor controls. When you walk in there, it's chaos. Just to get out some ice cream is difficult to go through. It's dirty, it's silly the way that they handle things. And what happens is you have very poor performances, horrible customer service. It also happens in audiology. Several hearing aid manufacturers come out and they want to buy out these little practices. And they buy out enough of them, and they have, and there are companies that I personally know about. There's this one in the Tulsa area that used to do about 150 hearing aids a month. They're down to maybe 15 to 20 hearing aids a month. And it's because there is one employer or one boss over possibly 60 separate locations. In the location in the Tulsa area, one guy was trading hearing aids for a VW Bug. They were going off crazy, doing silly things because there was poor management and low employer control when there's high choice by the employee, he just decides to do anything. And that becomes a low morale as well. And then employees that really want to have a good organization to work for, even though they have a lot of free will, they hate it. And so those are two different types of a balance in that choice. We can also talk about families. As you have a little baby, you have less control versus less choice versus more control. As the child grows up, you increase the level of choice. And then we have parents who don't know how to adjust themselves when, for instance, my son's almost 21. Now, when he makes bad choices, and he's gonna make bad choices, we have to allow our kids to make choices. And some of us don't want that. We want to see the control taken care of for us, and so we push it on people, and that always causes consternation for our kids. Let's give you another type of control that's all around us. There's media, Hollywood, marketing controls. So in media, they're telling us what we should see and why we should see it, instead of letting us make our own decision about that. They're controlling what types of news that we should look at. They think that we need to see this and not that. They have their own levels of control. But guess what people do? We have our own level of choice because we can turn off the TV, which I really recommend. Why are you watching the TV? Why aren't you watching the things that you need to be more interested in? Hollywood loves to control us too. And I'm not trying to decry this, but I'm trying to give you experiences of that. So one time, my son, who was at the time, I think he was 12 at the time, and my wife, we all decided to go to the movie to see one of these Sherwood Baptist movies. They just had gorgeous movies, starting with Freewill and Fireproof, and I think it was Fireproof if I remember right. And we're there, and we're kind of flicking popcorn at one another. There's no one in the area. And we see a trailer beforehand. It was some Hollywood movie targeted toward the Christians. And it was some weird thing with several main actors about this church and the choir that they wanted to move forward and get our attention. It was supposed to be a Christian kind of thing, but they missed the mark. They didn't catch that no one liked it. No one was interested in that movie. It's because they didn't understand to whom they were talking. Marketing does this all the time. I have to deal with marketing as well. There are types of marketing that push the control, but what they do it in a very unique way. They manipulate the controls. And so they reduce the choices so that you only have one choice, only to come to them. It's Coke versus Pepsi, and it becomes, him versus her. That kind of mentality also happens a lot in our industry, all industries, all situations. Hollywood is talking about this. We have series called Lost that is talking about free will and destination. They're talking about choice versus control. Why aren't we dealing with that? We need to have an answer in there. Now let's just move forward and kind of talk to you a little bit about the fight of choice and control. And when we have negative choice, when we have people who reduce their choice because they're so paralyzed by it, those tend to be victims. Victims have a low level of choice, or they perceive that they have no choice. I had an employee working for me one time. I had to let her go because every time I turned around, she's calling me up. Do I do this? Do I do that? Do I do this? And finally, I interrupted every 6 or 7 times in a 20-minute time frame until she realized, stop bugging me. She'd been there for years and she knew what to do, but she was a legalist and she had to ask my permission for everything. It was exhausting to work with. She always looked at things as, I don't know what to do. And she was paralyzed because of her choices. We'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But there are other types of negative control that happens when we get manipulation. Now, we talked about marketing and there's manipulation, but people manipulate one another. Employers manipulate their employees. The employees manipulate the employers. Governments manipulate their people. The people manipulate the government in different ways. It doesn't happen as much, but it can happen that way. Husbands and wives can do that, kids to fathers. This kind of manipulation without love is a type of control. And you see, there is a piece and there's an element in here that we have to put between it. It's love. When there's a balance of control, love, and choice, it is a fascinating balance that only God can do. So when we talk about the big questions in relation to choice and control, who is making the choice for me, and does that chooser really care? That's a great question. That's a question of the soul. As we've talked about before, the body will make a choice, for instance, I should have more ice cream. And the soul says, no, you don't need to do that. So the will smashes down the body. Then the soul will ask questions like this. Ask the big questions. What should I do with my life? Whom shall I marry? On and on. And the spirit is seated in heavenly places, Hebrews 9:27, as we said before. And the spirit is seated in truth. And the soul needs to ask the spirit those questions. How can the chooser really care for me while handling his own interests? So God's doing his own thing, all this stuff in the world, and does he really care for me? Because I felt like he doesn't always care. And that becomes the problem. We're missing the point in the word. What if I don't really understand my choices? Let me give you an example. In the second Matrix movie, and there's Neo, who's the guy that kind of manipulates the Matrix, and the Matrix is done by the machines. And we have the Oracle, and she says, and he's trying to talk to the Oracle, who seems to know the future. And she knows the destinies. And what she says back to him is, you want to understand the choice that you've already made. He's made a choice, but he doesn't get it. You see, Hollywood's talking about it. We need to have the answer. And here's what also happens. When we make bad choices, it sometimes comes back to haunt us. Just like that employee I mentioned. She had so many bad choices and so many bad things that she was paralyzed by her choices. I see engineers who walk in to an audiology practice and they want to figure everything out. And sometimes it gets so difficult for these people that I have to say kind of in jest, and I'm not trying to be rude here, but this is what I have to say. If you want a degree in audiology, you can go get that, and then you can know everything about what you wanted to do. Or you're gonna have to come to a place of trust. Let me just give you an example. Why would we trust God? So I made a horrible choice in a car. In 1998, I think it was, I wanted to buy this Dodge Intrepid. I loved the 97 and the 98 Dodge Intrepid. I'm in the dealership, and it was a leftover, year vehicle. And I thought it was a great deal. God was trying to get my attention. This is going to be a bad choice. I even smashed my wife's fingers in the car door. I realized later it was God saying, hey, come on. She was okay, but she was hurting for that time frame. And I missed the warranty conversation. It was a 3-year 36 warranty, but it was really pushed down because they didn't change the warranty date, the born on date, and I lost a whole year. There were 5 massive things that went wrong with that car, and I mean huge. And 2 or 3 of them were on me. I had to pay for massive amounts of repairs. And that bad choice led me to go get a Honda Accord. I remember in 2000, I just wanted to have a good car that would really work. And that bad choice could come back and haunt me and make me question all my choices. I remember very clearly another time, I think it was back in 2011 or something like that, there was this company called Tate Publishing. I felt very strongly that my first book, The Violin Secret, should go through Tate Publishing. I went down there and talked to them. I gave them $4,000 and they never did anything. I found out only later that it was a really bad choice. The Tate Publishing in the Oklahoma City area was stealing money left and right from people and wasn't even doing their job. And it made me question everything. What, did I hear badly from God? And it can make me question God and who I trust. But these are realities to our life. We can get all upset about it, or we can just be calm and realize, let's worry about the future because the past is already done. You see, we need to have the answers. We need to have a level of trust. If we take, and I'm going to bring this predisposition point up again. The truth of God is where we can find all truth. It doesn't mean that it's going to be easy for you. So if you have an idea like free will and you're evaluating this doctrine, did we put it, when God gave it to us, He brings it up to us. He wants us to put it to bed, to kill it, so that it can be resurrected as something new. Or we can just run off with it and start getting really angry. And as we get farther and farther away from God, we realize, wait, I don't have choice. I don't have control. I don't have trust. I don't have love just on this particular topic. Is that what you're looking for? The world's asking you these questions. You have the ability to answer them. We're going to show you how to look this forward in the next episode. Subscribe, check us out, because when you see what we can talk about here, it will give you a level of freedom you've never noticed. Thank you so much for listening to me.